So today I'm talking a little bit about video, about autism and culture. You know, how does one appreciate culture when one is autistic? And I thought, why not start with some nice lunch? I don't always have this kind of thing for lunch, but why not? On the first day I do cleaning and I clean around the house. Work up a bit of an appetite. But of course, but I thought, you know what guys, I'm talking about culture. So why not get myself some donuts and maybe a croissant. And some nice Irn-Bru to go with it. Well, you know. Now, I know some people might think I'm a bit fancy. You know, I even say it as croissant. However, not really. I'm not really that sophisticated. I mean, people who know me in real life know that my posh accent is somewhat of a showpiece for whenever the politician. Watching my Irn-Bru fizz. Aye, got me through uni. Yeah, got me through uni this did. Well, you know, Irn-Bru gets you through, as they say. Anyway, not sponsored. Irn-Bru ain't sponsored my video, but you know, I'm not exactly opposed to anything. Well, anyway, don't worry, Irn-Bru. Don't worry, we'll be talking about you later. Now, I know that there's a lot was discussed in that video about cultural literacy and communication, but that's going to be more of a public life discussion because it intersects with a lot of other topics. But this one, the more individual way, it deserves discussion on its own. Slanche. And so, as I say, I'm, you know, the fact that I call it a croissant is simply because, you know, j'écoute, répète et réponse. You know, or to put it in English, I heard it said as croissant. I said it as croissant, and people understood what I meant when I say croissant. And put a nice bit of butter on my croissant. I'm using the flour, so whether people call it butter, I do not know. As I say, English is not my best language. No worries. But anyway, so why am I treating you to this picnic when I'm talking about culture? I mean, after all, the quiz that JJ McCullough, discussed. It talked a lot more about, some of the questions. It talked about literature, like books. I'll get onto that later. Like puppetry, like topiary, like terminology, you know, that sort of thing. However, there is something in my mind, because to me, one of the first ways I find with a culture is food. I'm a bit of a picky eater, perhaps, but I look to, you know, I have the food I like. You know, but more importantly, for the purposes of today, to understand the culture, you know, when looking at culture, one thing I look at is the gastronomy. Why? Well, it is perhaps the most easily digestible part of the culture. For you see, foods are unique in so many ways. So many factors: climate, religion, trade, surrounding areas that become the standard, various factors are often cited by historians, that is, of climate and religion sort of form the food norms, which stick around even when a society becomes more globalized and secular. But Buffy. But there is a cultural universality to food, because even though across the world people eat different things, they eat. Meals are a part of culture. Meals form families. Well, family bonds. Families, when they can, gather around a table and share their stories of the day over food. Friends are made. Relationships. Cultures meet. So, throughout history, cultures meet at the dinner table. I mean, and they come to understand, after all. Guess I'm not the only person who's ever put teriyaki sauce on corned beef. Hey, as I said, I'm not culturally sophisticated. Anyway. Oh! I have to deal with that later. Anyway. The donut. Some see it as more of a, I hate the term low culture, but, more working class or pedestrian culture. Yeah, pedestrian, that's the term. I believe. Because some foods are given status, and to me, as from my autistic brain, I'm like, quoi? What? After all, this is a pastry. This is tasty. This is a pastry. And this is tasty. In so many ways, they share, on that sort of physical level, they share similarity, but on so many levels of what we think about things and how we perceive the world, they appear different. I'm just gonna finish my lunch now, and I'll meet you in a bit. Hello. Hello again. Well, yes, of course. Might as well top up my Irn-Bru. And just to say it fizz like that. Oh. A nice afternoon. A nice cool Irn-Bru. It's lunch. But no. Because there are more formalised forms of culture. Because, well, there's different theories about culture, obviously, and I'm in no way qualified to talk about all of them, because I learned a few, but trust me, it gets pretty complicated as I, trying to example. But so there's this thing about genre fiction. I think that's the term for it. I'm a bit new to all this sort of reading culture stuff. What with being dyslexic, I struggle to read with things. Probably why I have a much more picture book kind of. Well, I say picture book, that's probably the wrong term, but books with a good amount of pictures in them. But even a work of fiction can tell you something. At least that's what I was told at uni. In history class. Now, obviously it won't tell you the same things as, say, this book. Or even this book. I just picked 3 random books off my shelf, as it were. Well, it wasn't random, but you know what I mean. I was like, just trying to find some books that represented what I was talking about. Just to make it a wee bit more interesting, so we had something to look at. And of course, so, a book like this, you get open, and you find a little bit of facts about the world. So, in this case, you'll find out some interesting facts about Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. If you open it on this page, obviously. Other pages will tell you about other places, but you got that already. This will tell you about the probably first grand strategy computer game I ever played. I think it was about, I can't even remember now, maybe about 6 years old. And I remember playing it. I get hold of the disc and install it on my old computer. I think that's right. But, now I'd already played some grand strategy board games like Diplomacy, but, it's one of those things. And say if you open this page in the book, it'll talk to you about how to colonise a province, or build cities and finances and economy. If you turn to this page, in the game, how to do that in the game of Europa Universalis. So you might be thinking, so what does this book tell you? After all, it is a work of fiction. Aye, it is a work of fiction. But one thing that they taught us as historians is that even a work of fiction contains some truths. For you see, a work of fiction contains within it norms, cultural artifacts. Essentially, it's the way they phrased it was like fossilised DNA of when it was published, printed, edited, written. You know, if you've got a reprint, it might be a bit different. So, but you take these ideas of what is normal, what is understood, how they see the world. You know, how the writer's the philosophy of the writer, or the way that the book is structured, the kind of morality, you know, if there's like a idea about morality, or, you know, that kind of ethos that carries through the book. Nah, I'm not going to spoil this one, but one on it's called The Theatre Cat by Noel Streatfeild. But at a point you can understand it's almost like a little snapshot of the world that this book was written in. As they gave a comparison of a bone. If you dig up a bone of a dinosaur, you can find out a wee bit about the world that dinosaur lived in. And with a book about fiction, you can find out a lot about the world. You can find out little bits here and there. Yeah. So, like, you can find out about ballet. You know, the norms of the ballet. And, you know, the kind of ballet culture that existed at the time Noel Streatfeild wrote the book. Albeit with a wee twist for our wee cat. But, you know, and that's the point. And one thing I found as an autistic person, you know, you can read these kind of things and just enjoy them. You know, there can be a wee bit of entertainment too. You know, a happy little story. I haven't gone into deep analysis with this one because, you know, I was having fun with it. A present from my brother. Because he knows I like cats. Oh well. As I say, I haven't done a deep dive on this one, looking into all its tropes and everything, because you know what? That's why sometimes culture can feel more like a entertainment. And it's true. My bookshelves mostly contain computer games. Because I am in no way a massive reader, even though you know, it can be quite nice at times, albeit it can be a bit of a challenge. But you know, drinking out, you know, you can have a nice time with things. And anyway, so sometimes you can have this culture as a sort of, you know, a sense of emotional relief. You know, not just about communicating with your fellow citizen. That's one thing you can do with it. Or find out about life and how people see the world beyond yourself. And, you know, cross the cultural divides with different things. But also, you can. Also, I found sometimes culture acts as a bit of a sort of respite. Escapism, I think you might say. A way to sort of get away from it all. A sort of... Because after all, let's face it, I can work on improving myself so much before it just gets tiring, especially as... one thing that made me kind of frustrated was how hard it was for people to see past my autism. But you know who doesn't see me as autistic? The theatre cat. Theatre cat just wants me to have a jolly wee time. time with a fun story. Or the Irn-Bru. Just wants me to have a nice refreshing drink. And you know what? In a lot of ways you guys do too. Because, you know, there's no way I could get anywhere in academia, I don't think. I've tried. But I'm not very sophisticated, I'm not very clever, and I don't think of myself as a big intellectual person. But, you know, you guys, like, have a bit of, you know, take a bit of time out your day to just sit and watch somebody chat a bit about art. Art, life, just whatever. I try not to bait rage and stuff because you know what? Life's too short. And I got to. And why bother when I can just have a nice, much more happy life, relaxing and doing things that make people happy. Anyway, I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day. And however you enjoy culture as a sort of way of communicating with other people, or, you know, a way of taking some time away from things. You sort of holiday without having to go on holidays. You know, without the stress of like packing up and setting all things. So, you know, however you enjoy culture as a means of communication or a means of relaxation, it was lovely having you here.